Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
Out of 910 graduating students in the class of 2014 from HBS, 3 went into water. Of those 3, only Peter Brooks and I remain, and meaning no offense to all our wonderful classmates, I'm glad it's him. Peter is just a really great guy. A former Marine, he worked across a variety of fascinating opportunities before setting up Sylmar Group. He and his partner Michael have been hard at work creating a compounding machine in water, building with an infinite holding period, and as you will hear, it has developed exceptionally in the 6 years since it was founded. I have been looking forward to this for a long time because there are few people as thoughtful, practical, wise, self-effacing, and talented as Peter. I was also amazed to find out that this is the first time he has talked about the Sylmar story on a podcast. So you're literally hearing it here first. Please enjoy my conversation with Peter Brooks. Peter Brooks, as I live and breathe.
Tom Ferguson. How are you, sir?
I am really well. How are you?
Terrific.
This has been a long time in coming. When we built the initial list of the fundamental molecule, there were names on it. Yours was one of them. and it is really great to be able to have this conversation because I feel like, obviously, we met at grad school. Every time I think about the machine that you are building at Sylmar, all sorts of the theories and heuristics start sort of popping off in my mind. So there's an element of kind of business geekiness that I think I'm going to 100% give into during this. Which leads me to the first question, which is, what is a compounding machine?
So yeah, I'll talk. We'll get business geekiness, but where it all started for us was also just water geekiness and just obsession over that molecule. But compounding, we think about in a lot of different ways. One thing is that just sort of exponential thinking, and is a really hard thing for the human brain to comprehend and digest. This is sort of, I think a lot of us kind of woke up to it in COVID, sort of the idea of geometric growth in real time. But I think we think about compounding in a few ways. There's the narrow financial compounding that happens when you take a really patient long-term outlook and you don't continue to raise capital and you just focus on reinvesting. And that reinvestment then creates incremental benefit that then leads to more potential good investments. That's kind of what we call the equity flywheel, where, you can hopefully, if you have great investments, great businesses that deliver, then you can use all of that. If you don't have to sell, and if you don't have to dividend your cash back out to investors, then you can put it back into the business. So that's like the math part of it. But there's so much other compounding that we're learning about from investing with great people and holding on to these businesses for long periods of time. The cultural compounding that comes from just bringing a whole bunch of really great water practitioners together from different sides of the industry, be it water treatment, be it the kind of mechanical support movement of water. It's amazing how people who are obsessed with water really can vibe out and share good ideas, and that belief in kind of steel sharpening steel. And then the compounding, or you can call it network effects, but sort of that like each additional thing creates more value than its narrow addition. It creates something more in scale. So that's how we think about all future investments and growth, is what does this do beyond just the incremental growth of the business? How does it make everything else better? Because the real exciting part are starting to put together systems and processes, the human capital, the idea that good people from one side of our business can maybe work in the other side. And I think cleanly summarizes sort of compounding should just be the consistent accumulation of small advantages that allow us to win, but by being better, faster, cheaper, not just by winning for winning's sake. So it's really fun. And I mean, I think of friends who are in industries where they're required to think in a little bit shorter time frame. I was talking to one, they acquired a business and said, did a whole strategic sit down and lined out 30 different things they would do to make that business better. And then realized that 29 of them took longer than 5 years. So they said, all right, we'll just raise prices. And so all of a sudden, which might work and might, lend towards some value. But I think that sort of, we see that as a little bit more extractive. And what we're trying to do is real value creation that comes from making a great thing, incrementally better.
I really want to get onto the actual mindset that affords you, whether you're sitting kind of, it feels like you're sitting on obviously you sometimes get hit by a storm, but the sitting on an island in the middle of the ocean where over on the mainland is a whole bunch of people chasing their tails with kind of misaligned incentive structure all over the place because of the commercial. Anyway, we'll get there. But I do think the listeners need a section more context. That was such a cogent explanation of the importance and the multi-layered version of compounding within your business. I love the invocation of Dave Brailsford's aggregation of marginal gains for British cycling Olympians. Like going in there, but obviously everyone else uses it now. But just walk us through, in light of that, what you and Michael are building at Sylmar.
So Michael Wardy, my partner, and I had both kind of nerded out on water in separate but parallel paths. I started out of college in the Marine Corps and did ROTC, was commissioned as a lieutenant and then into the infantry, and did a few rounds in Iraq as a platoon commander. And my time there, which is, this is Iraq, Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers. We're right there in the Euphrates River Valley. Obviously I was struck by the avoidable and tragic consequences of the war, but was more in some ways scared looking at their existential challenges related to water. And actually the transboundary disputes with upstream riparian neighbors, Turkey, Iran, and Syria. And so the part of me that said, hey, how can we prevent the next war being fought over water, launched me on a crusade first to India on a Fulbright grant, where I was studying actually rural decentralized water supply, looking at some of the drinking water challenges and groundwater challenges they had there, but also very interested in China, India, Pakistan disputes over the Tibetan headwaters, which everyone here should know is the reason why Tibet will likely never be free, is because that's where all that water starts. And I guess the more I looked at the global, quote unquote, global water challenge, I realized there's no such thing. There's a series of watershed by watershed, well by well, water system by water system. No two waters are alike. And that highly local and highly provisional nature waters really means it's a business and technology challenge. How many times have we nerded out on that? That really this is about pulling together business models, policies, and site-specific technologies in the right place to make things work. So Michael, my partner, was on that same path. He in China. And then I worked at Xylem, wonderful place, full of great people, a lot of great friends there still. And my partner at some earlier stage water technology companies, Oasis Water, Edison Water Group. And then we met up and worked on a number of things across the water, kind of like value chain, from early stage skunk works all the way up to kind of large scale infra. And I think what we realized was, and actually had helped launch a really great company with a great leader called Alonia, run by our good friend and board member, Nicole Richards. And when we looked at that, which is a kind of space age technology for water, engineering new microbes and enzymes to degrade hard to treat contaminants and upcycle, I guess what we realized about ourselves is we are not TRL1. We are not the 0 to 1 folks. Your entrepreneurs, the folks you invest in, bless them. It's amazing. And Michael and I, long-term, we were Imagine H2O mentors, and, I've been involved with you and Scott and that whole team for years. And I think we're so inspired by that and realize actually, our contribution is going to be something different. And then what we said is, what if we could still push the boundaries of what's possible with water and try things new, but to do it not with a kind of the blank whiteboard, trying to get that first product market fit. Again, not that it's not important, it's critical. It just wasn't our DNA. And instead, what we saw was that a lot of the great companies that were actually creating intrinsic value or doing something mission critical with this molecule are actually small, regional, owner operated, or sometimes even mom and pops. These are businesses that are really, by any characteristic of value, recurringness, capital intensity, profitability, whatever, are like off the charts. They're just often small. And they're not small because of any structural impediment to growth. They're small because the owner reached a point where they were happy. They reached a good sort of scale, and growing is hard. I was talking to the business leader who said, growing is almost as painful as shrinking a business. He's like, I've done both and they're both really hard. Shrinking and closing down branches and all that is a whole other thing you think would be but it's almost as painful as growing. And so we said, what if, and many of these are owned by, everybody, I think you've talked about in this podcast, the workforce transition, the mass exodus of
pieces,
of most of the brain power in industry. Yeah, it's happening in every industry, but it's really happening in water. I'll remind this group because the Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act just turned 3. So all the infrastructure and that wave of professionals in our industry that came in then, are approaching that retirement point. So many of them, we realized, didn't have a lot of great options for what to do with the future of their business. They could sell to a large strategic like Xylem or others that you're aware of. In a lot of cases, they may not see their team or their, the exact kind of brand of what they built continue on the same fashion. Or there's pure financial investors who we joke, no water is wet, and that's about it. And so wouldn't actually be able to bring a whole lot of intrinsic knowledge and plans. So anyway, so what we decided was, if people have heard the term sort of entrepreneurship through acquisition, ETA was sort of a kind of a thing that would fit both where the market was, but also what Michael and I thought we could be decent at. So we're basically doing is partnering with really high quality teams, really terrific business builders that are just small, and bring them together over time. So not in the classic roll up, which people will say we're very familiar with and have a lot of friends and colleagues with the US Filter story. Credit to the folks who built that. I think we saw a great return for a narrow set of financial investors, but unfortunately probably not as great experience for the employees or for the customers or for a lot of the technologies that have kind of been shelved. Obviously, it's now part of the Xylem family. And we said, what if we could partner with these businesses, invest in them, not take cash out, grow them, and help them come together over time. So that's sort of what we've been up to.
It's so interesting. You got a zillion places. I want to go to the Furiously Practical, which is, I would have a few people who have done really interesting, whether you call it search funds, ETA, whatever it would be. But they go through the search, they find the business, and then they find themselves on day one as an operator of a business where they are in charge and they've got both hands on the steering wheel and the foot on the accelerator brake, etc. This is their now truck to drive. And a lot of the description of the learning curve has been that it was vertiginous. So just going through the process, what I'm really interested in is the kind of practical changes in your head as you took on this extraordinary kind of responsibility of being the person to drive the bus within the company, but with necessarily, everything was very new, very quickly, all at once. What was that deluge like? How did you do it? How did you, cope, I guess?
It was, so first off, made every mistake, got punched in the face, fell on our face a number of times. But I guess here's the reason we were blessed. One is we just had a great partnership. Michael and I have full mind meld with us. We have a bunch of really terrific investors who are all 20, 30 year in this journey, want to hold forever in what, everybody says, wow, how novel. And we're of course like, that's just how businesses used to be built. The sort of not prepping for exit was sort of like the way every family business ever ran. We're adjacent to, if people are familiar with the search fund space, we're technically not. We're a holding company with a long hold time horizon, but very similar to it. And I think the good news for us was, one is we'd operated businesses in our industry already for a while. I'd been leading teams since I was 20, 30, large and small, up to a kind of company size. So we knew how to, in the same way that we made mistakes through all that too, but weren't afraid to take hold of a thing. And I think the other stuff is that we really focused on businesses that didn't need a whole lot of work. Now, of course, there was investments to make and new ideas. All those new ideas came from everybody on the team. No smart, brilliant kind of lightning bolt, white knight showing up to fix everything mindset. It was actually just sitting down and listening and then slowly prioritizing and then just knocking them down. There's no shortage of challenges in every business, and certainly small businesses, have a ton of clunky back end and chaos and sort of, a lot of paper systems and, all the things that you'd expect. But what they had brilliantly were really terrific water professionals who knew their customers in and out and had really wonderful long-term relationships, 35, 72 years for one of our businesses. And we're doing all the hard stuff, and it was all this kind of back end that we could help. And basically all the owners that we've acquired from have stuck on in some form or fashion because they wanted to be a part of that next phase of the journey. And our pitch was a little bit like, we can come and help take all the annoying, boring stuff off your plate and allow you to just focus on the thing you love, which is usually engineering or selling or working on customer problems. So that day one is really helping to systematize and standardize or really just solve problems. That's really all it was. You'll hear about some folks who can show up who acquire businesses and the next day they've slapped in a new CRM, HRA, HRIS, ERP on it. We're not that. We believe in obviously bringing the business together over time, but oftentimes what we're doing is sitting down with that owner of the business or the general manager or president of it and sitting alongside them and saying, okay, what do you think? What are the priorities for this group? Some of the businesses we have on our team are overwhelmed with inbound. If we tried to step on the gas for sales, they would totally flame out, and they're already at the risk of losing customers because of how how big that is. In other places, that actually is a priority, and we need to figure out a sales plan. So I think that we definitely took one of our principles is basically don't mess it up. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth. A lot of listening and learning, and then kind of working together to figure out what are the key problems. How do we prioritize them, and then how do we source the capital or time or headcount to actually solve those problems, and then just do that on repeat. That's it. I mean, that's so no shortage of ups and downs, of course, and in any business. So to your point about us being the kind of like the quiet island, that's not how I think about us. So we're swirling in challenges, but I think we just took a measured and patient approach in trying to, and I think that's again the benefit of it. It's not that we're any less ambitious or don't desire to build something great, but when you think in 20, 30 year time horizons, you can take a little bit of a breath and take some tactical patience, which sometimes we could be accused of, intransigence, but mostly it's trying to just figure out what is the right thing before we really, really go after it.
I think that's so thoughtful. How replicable actually is it? Because I've seen an emergent, so with the sort of growing of entrepreneurship through acquisition, as well as people who are looking to kind of build platforms within it, there is a sort of, it feels like anyway, kind of an emerging gospel that you need to have your equivalent of your operating system. Obviously, there are touchstones out there. Dan has a business system being kind of like really prevalent example. But it does suggest that you can go in and there are like things to be done that are universal. Now, everybody will say that they have flexibility within it and then they're kind of navigating. But I'm curious, in your experience, you mentioned a principle. Are there other principles that you think are universal, or or are the principles you're referring to a mode of thought and a mode of kind of ingestion of what the business is in front of you versus kind of a quote unquote playbook, which you hear about other businesses in franchising or whatever the hell it might be?
Yeah. So it's less that, right? You'll hear in franchising or Brad Jacobs, who's an amazing business builder at XPO, has very much the gospel of day after we close, it's going to be, here's your new system. And I think what we found is our businesses, one is that maybe the average LTL carrier is sort of like copy and paste, can work in all circumstances. In ours, there's a lot of site specificity. There's different cultures. There's different, actually, even products and services that we have. But that said, yeah, we do want to create a backend. So we have the versioning Sylmar business system. It's kind of an amalgam of the entrepreneurial operating system, which I would highly recommend to anybody on this group. I was an operations officer in the Marine Corps, went to Harvard Business School, thought I knew how to like run a meeting and run a team. I was just lost, especially on the business front. EOS, guys. So now I'll get my referral bonus here for recommending with a facilitator. Is really an exceptional method. It's a kind of combination of kind of Rockefeller principles and Jim Collins' Good to Great and a bunch of other. But what's great about it is it's focused on businesses really going from 0 to 1. That taking that first step into creating a cadence of meetings. Again, no one likes meetings. Creating the bare minimum scaffolding of, what are the measurables that we need to have each week? How do we think about our goals? What are they? Even just self-defining. Hey, what do you hope to do before the end of the year? And taking the kind of the pressure of this hierarchical top-down soul-crushing machine. Because actually, we sat around with all of the business owners we had and said, who used to be at a big company? Every hand went up. Said, who left that big company because they didn't like it? The hand stayed high. So what we're trying to do is create a small company feel, maintain a small company feel and an entrepreneurial ethos, even as we scale. And I think what we've identified, though, is that no one in any of the businesses will say that the reason they're so great is because of how they invoice or how they collect. There's a bunch of like kind of back office things that we want to make sure we can kind of make smoother because it's pretty chaotic a lot of times. But then where the business system helps is we now have, on the order of kind of 12 operating businesses, either branches within or operating companies. And so Michael and I don't scale. We really, when we first invested, we dropped in as CEOs of the 2 platforms and God, every hiring and firing every day of, getting, again, punched in the face, as they say, from customers and vendors and, just a lot of the business building challenges. I think that's maybe one thing to steer folks away from who are thinking about, investing, is this idea that you can get and just sit atop and just watch the arrow go up and to the right. It's like, no, you're in. You better be there early. You better stay late. You better, get involved and get to know your team, get to know their family. It's really, but that necessarily doesn't scale for the 2 of us. And that's when we realized we needed to both bring on other great people, which we've done, and then also find a way to have a system that kind of can hum in the background. I think even one of the things so we're trying to adapt that, plus some of our own special sauce, plus pulling from, we have members of the team who come through the Danaher training program. I'd say just the quick, and where they have an amazing playbook of processes that we can kind of fold into the system that applied for our specific end market. The one comment on it, as I've gotten to know the Danaher business system a little better, is I think there is this sense that it's this top-down hierarchical sort of playbook that works in all circumstances. I mean, one interesting thing I learned is that Danaher actually for new acquisitions, does not implement a system-wide ERP. So you'd think that would be, for the Danaher of all people, of course they're going to. And they said, no, it doesn't really make sense, actually. It makes sense for us to consolidate at the top and make sure, obviously, they're still closing in 5 days, reporting out their financials and all. But actually what it is like a more of a system. There's certainly some like checklist, deadline-driven processes, but a lot of it is just agile, common sense thinking in a system that allows, sort of the Eisenhower quote from the sort of military perspective on this is it's plans are nothing and planning is everything. As soon as you've created a new plan, it's immediately flawed and incorrect and off because the market's changed and the battlefield has changed. So this is this idea that really what you need is a smooth and coherent way of adjusting to the land that shifts underneath you because no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And so that's, I think, what we're trying to build is something that's agile and grows because we've grown pretty quickly and it's sort of the thing we tried to do years ago didn't work. So what are the kind of the basic principles that we know would apply in businesses at any scale that we can kind of repeat?
How are you being pulled as you grow? I think you're one of the most sort of thoughtful people, and I'd love to actually dig in a little bit more into the principles that you've learned, especially through this, first 5 years of amalgamation of businesses. But do you feel like the pressure of growth is pulling your mindset in an area where you are reluctant to go? Are there pressures of growth that mean it's more difficult to stick to the heuristics, mindset, mode of business, however we want to describe it, that actually you think is responsible for your success? Is there discipline that you need to have in the face of growth in order to stick to your swing?
Growth is interesting. We've grown faster than, and actually haven't by any of our wonderful investors been pushed to grow faster. Ironically, the people we have, again, just to recommend to your group of folks thinking about starting something, Michael and I thought about going it on our own, doing a self-funded plus, SBA loan or some, independent sponsor idea. And then, and of course, everybody's saying, well, then you give up control and then you've got somebody breathing over your neck. And I think what I realized is we look at our early pitch deck, sort of ideas and they were horrible, just not good ideas. Businesses that actually ended up doing pretty well, I guess, but really not. So I think this for all this, like we thought we knew what we were doing. So I think this is why, again, people love you, Tom, is like you bring on an investor who's actually a joy to be with and helps you get smarter and helps you avoid pitfalls. And in our case, was very adamant, the whole group were adamant, do not buy the first business, buy the right business, wait for the right fit and the right quality, and actually are helping us be more disciplined in deciding where should we invest. Is it in the business, which is where most of our investing goes, or in the very off chance that there's a perfect fit, great culture, great alignment, then yeah, you can do an acquisition. And I think what we found when we got into our industries and got to know the people out there, that there were more higher quality and sooner in our model, we found other great partners than we thought. So that kind of necessitated a kind of a change in strategy, which drove the growth. Yeah. So it wasn't, in a great way, but this is not a feel a gun to the back of our head or feel like we have. It's more like, how do we possibly pass on this business? This is such a great group of people that we know will make us so much better, not just because of what they do, but how they're going to make the rest of us better. That reverse integration that we talk about a lot. It's like there's a lot of mutuality when we sit down with a new company that comes into the family to help. They'll often have made something better than we have because we're so early still. And so I think that, but then in that, you don't want to lose your way or lose your soul in bringing in something new. Oftentimes the nurturing and care for your earlier investments can lapse. And, we've been accused, I think, in our pretty much decentralized, hands-off, not breathing down owner, sort of operator necks that, kind of haven't heard from you in a while kind of thing. So we realized actually that maintaining the Sylmar ethos and sort of keeping the family together is also kind of critical to making this work in the long term.
It's so interesting that there's a kind of an other side to that kind of the Buffett idea that there's a reason I invested in you in the first place. You crack on. I'm here when I'm needed. I just need to hear the bad news as soon as it comes. But otherwise, do whatever you like. But then the other bit is like, wait. No. I still want to talk to you.
Still want to talk. And actually, and again, we're going to be better together. Again, most of what made these companies great is not us and was already great. But yeah, there's going to be opportunities, serendipitous or otherwise. I mean, we're not even really pushing the synergy point, which I even hate the term, but the idea that, there's two of us now, we can go back to our vendors and maybe renegotiate better terms because of economies of scale and all those basic. But really, it's this like our first business, EAA Water, was Leaders in Managing Water.
Yep.
Our second main business, General Pump Company, when water matters most is their logo. I mean, just water is like the common element among these, and people who care and have this quiet professional pride of knowing that the water supply or the systems that undergird it. And so we really want to harness that energy and try to bring that together, which is these are fundamentally not water treatment or well technicians. These are water professionals, and to help encourage them to think of themselves as more of a public servant. We could talk about water as being sort of the third pillar of public safety behind fire and police because of how critical it is. So that's the other piece of it too, is sort of, if there is a kind of Sylmar-wide ethos, it's going to be about what we can do to be better stewards of and push what's possible with water.
Absolutely. One of the things I find most confusing, because when we graduated from grad school, I mean, there were 4 of us that went into water, and I think
I remember,
remaining, and they're both on this podcast, I think, something like that. Though what I'm wondering is, it's so obvious once you get into it and once you get close to it, that this is the substrate upon which everybody relies. And there is intrinsic meaning, and the people are dedicated, unbelievably smart, really humble professionals, especially relative to their actual utilities to society, which is total. Well, why do you think we graduated with 910 people who are really smart, right? Why don't you think it's more obvious to people as a place to come and work?
Yeah, this is a constant lamentation that we've had, you and I now, where if you say you're going into energy or healthcare or tech, sort of like very quick conversation at a cocktail party. And then you say water. Whoa, what do you mean about that? So I think that's part of one of the goals. I know you and I have, but others in our industry is sort of Now, shoes a little bit on the other foot. I don't know if you felt this in the last even just like 4 or 5 years of water's kind of cool. Water's sexy. People want to be a part of, and I think understand the broader story of, which is obviously more complicated reality, that future wars will not be fought over water. Very few water wars have ever happened. Water is actually mostly a source of peace. And actually, there's still plenty of it. But it's also tricky because then you double click and you're like, okay, wait. So too little of it is bad. That's a drought. Too much of it is actually the most destructive force in human history. That's called flooding. And then the exact right amount, but the wrong quality, it's useless. So it's like, gosh, you got to get a lot of stuff right to make this work. The number of private equity investors who've sort of banged on our door to sort of try to create a water platform around us or something has gone from being kind of charming and sort of ego boosting to now just straight up annoying. But anyway, all respect to them. But when a lot of them do, they'll go to the WEFTech, they'll go to ACE, they'll go to the other water industry conferences, and then they'll say things like, boy, gosh, a lot of this is capital intensive, bid, 3-year sales cycle, low margin, overcompeted stuff. And I think I heard on a good conversation you had at some point too, which is, that scares and ought to. I hope it does a lot of the kind of quick turn and burn investor types who are trying to get into water, get rich quick, and it doesn't work. Patience is rewarded in our industry. So I don't know. In terms of why it's not a kind of defined career path, I think probably goes to, I think still, I guess maybe the other part is that 50% of the dollar spend in the total addressable market is on utilities. I had a wonderful professor advisor in grad school, John Briscoe, the late John Briscoe, who was head of the water for the World Bank and was the Brazil country manager for them, who was just like desperately trying to convince these Harvard engineers and law students and business students to go to work for utilities. He's like, go work for water utilities. So you talk about going to the Stockholm Water Summit. I was just flabbergasted. Not a single water practitioner, not a single person who's actually like in charge of a thing that purveys water or controls it, And then he got the Stockholm Water Prize. He's like, I think a lot more highly of them now. But I wonder if that's it, that most of the work, the important work being done is actually done by the public sector or utility sector, which maybe isn't quite so sexy as a career path, even though I think you and I both would agree it's an amazing place to work. A lot of these places. I'll never forget the Imagine H2O Summit that you hosted at Google headquarters when the general manager at East Bay Municipal Utility District came in and said, this is great, Google, wonderful. Just so we're clear, we were here before you and we will be here after you. Sort of the longevity and time horizon that we see on the average utility is sort of mind-boggling to most entrepreneurs. I don't know. I guess maybe it comes from something like your great podcast, telling stories about people that are finding ways to create meaningful careers, doing something that they can be passionate about, even if it's maybe a little harder to explain to your aunt and uncle at a cocktail party.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you do what again? a lot of this, I've been thinking a lot about the S-curve within water recently, this sort of weird idea that like ever since we stopped being a kind of a roving band of gatherers and we decided to like harness water in order to be able to grow crops, like we have been water technologists. This is not this is not a new industry.
I love that.
In terms of technology, we are just lifting off the x-axis of moving through our S-curve. Like this is just our world. Like, it's very different from yours, which is just a whole bunch of businesses that make a huge amount of internal economic sense. But as you lift off that, the inflection point becomes as a result of not the first big win, but the first collection of big wins, which enables that recycling of capital, but crucially talent, to then the rest of the followers up through the steepest part of the S-curve. And then maybe what will change is when that arrives, but also, but people who are pursuing strategies with a degree of kind of internal coherence that you are, because you're obviously doing it in a perfect part of the business. I wondered, as you grow, to go back to the sort of the impact of growth thing, I remember a conversation we had, and I just thought it was so cool that you were sitting in General Pump Company with a General Pump Company shirt on, and you were working General Pump Company. You were doing that. Over time, the platform builds, and the kind of the inevitable endpoint of this for both you and Michael is that you become capital allocators. You want to maintain your connectivity to the business, or maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I'm curious as to how you think about that transition. How did you learn, or how are you learning about capital allocation, and what does it mean over time in a business like yours?
Yeah, so we're learning every day about particularly like our roles and responsibilities and how those evolve. I think one of our investors said, so roughly every 5 million of EBITDA, you're going to have a different job description, if you continue to scale. So we're on job number 4, I guess. The way we think about it is, so the capital allocation, so we have a bunch of, sort of legendary capital allocators who are investors who will tell you about the 5 uses of free cash. You can dividend, which we won't do because we're reinvesting all profits back into the business. And our investors wouldn't want to be taxed on it. These are the wonderful kind of folks that don't need to see liquidity in a short period of time. They'd rather see it go back into a compounding vehicle. Again, you mentioned Warren Buffett, but there's something to the fact that 90% of his net worth he got after age 60. If you hold it for long periods of time, you can really create value. So you can dividend, you can pay down debt. We use debt. Occasionally would like it to be a lower amount, sometimes higher amount, but that's one lever. You can buy back shares, which isn't something we've done. Maybe down the road, it would be a good use of capital. And then you do organic or inorganic investments. So the organic investments, which is where we start, which is like hire more great people, expand the footprint, add another product line, open a new branch. That's just business building. That's really fun stuff. And we're kind of across the businesses about 18% organic growth, which is like a really important measure for us because so much of the M&A world, people just paste over underperforming bad business decisions with new acquisitions. Say, look, we're still growing. And I think very important for us to say, no, actually the engine is humming and we're caring for these people and we're still thinking about them and we still love them as if they were the first businesses. And then on the inorganic, it's like we have a really tight yield box, if you want to use the term. Sort of like these business characteristics have to be really high quality, which means we're talking to a lot of wonderful business owners and entrepreneurs who have built amazing things that still just maybe aren't the right fit for us. So we're saying no to 9 out of 10 or 95 out of 100 conversations we're having. There's a lot of businesses out there that just don't work for us or don't work now. Actually, we're under a letter for business we'll likely acquire in the next few months that was the first conversation was in 2020. So that's the other piece is when you have a long time horizon, you can literally say, we'll talk down the road. Let us know when you're ready because we think you'd be a great partner for us. So it's so fun. So we have good capital allocators who will tell you that whole story. And then we have another investor, a few investors who are sort of like, what is this capital allocation stuff? Like that's something you should think about like once a year, maybe. Like most of what you're doing is just running the business. Like who capital allocates on a daily basis? Like that's not something you come to work to do. That's something you check in on with your board and maybe with advisors. But that's not your day job. Your day job is still going to be doing all the things you mentioned at first, which is like listening, hiring, solving problems. We're often the source of the problems a lot of time too. So it's like hearing good, honest feedback from people about, hey, why'd you just make my life harder by either, implementing something new or just listening and soliciting feedback from our teams and then trying to get out in the field, still seeing our customers. I think that's maybe the other one is, I think I rue the day when we become such capital that we're not actually like thinking about customers. I think that, we go to these conferences at the business schools and so little of their time is actually like talking about like, what are you doing to actually solve a customer problem? And so much of it is about capital allocation, which is important. Don't get me wrong. You got to get that right. But I think you get that right on a very different time scale than from a full-time job. So that's how we think about it.
I find it the most important skill. I mean, there were other ways in which I was baptized in fire in terms of understanding quite how important sales is. But like more than sales, like as you say, proximity to the customer. And what is seen as, oh, well, I'd rather be working on strategy or whatever. The most important thing you can do is to go and like have as much contact with the market as you possibly can, understand, because it's just a sort of an intellectual discovery of real understanding, right?
It's also so much fun. I mean, I think that's actually one thing that, to your point on scaling and how we've been able to do it, is that Mike and I are kind of both naturally a little bit more, let's say, sales guys, I guess, sort of love growing, love meeting new people, not to win them over, but just to form a new partnership, new friendship, and hopefully solve problems by listening and maybe have something that they didn't know was possible and solving it. So what that meant, though, is that we've definitely had some kind of blind spots on operations and on systems. So one of the things that we've done is bring on great new leadership to backfill the roles that we had. And it turns out it wasn't that hard to find people that were better at that job than we were. We're good at some things, but it turns out there's a lot of really terrific individuals in our market and in our industry who many of whom are capped out, are looking ahead at the career paths ahead of them and saying, I don't want any of those people's jobs, and maybe want to be a part of something that's a little more exciting and dynamic, where they can have the kind of the autonomy to really run a thing and see it grow and then benefit from that. So it's been helpful for us to meet people like that and have them come in and show us a better way of doing business too.
So the hiring thing is something I wanted to ask you about, because the proof is in the pudding. You're really good at it. How did you learn, and what can you tell us about the practical steps that you take? Maybe with a little bit of focus on patience. How patient do you find that you have to be? But I just want to hear how you think about it, and then almost practically how you do it.
Yeah, it's patience, except when there's a real urgent need. And it's patience, except when you find that person and then, wait, we don't really have a spot for this person. Now, how do I do it? I think the great news from our encouragement from our investors and others who advise us is sort of like, if you find A plus talent, like find a way to hire them, get them in the family, find a way to make it work, and think. And again, this is in the long-term thinking where that hit to the budget doesn't really matter in the 30-year journey if this is the person to help us get us there. So that's the hire ahead thesis. Again, it hurts, investors. I don't know if you want me telling your portfolio companies to do that, but the folks that do it well often do. You hire to where the puck is going, sort of the Wayne Gretzkyism, not where you are now. So that's one. Two is, I guess it's just constantly talking to people. The amazing president of General Pump Company now, a guy named Tim Oman, was somebody I'd been talking to for years, literally, right? Two plus years. The company had been trying to recruit him for 10 years before that, just because, saw him as unique, fast rising talent in our industry. And boy, has he done a better job than I ever could have. But yeah, it may take that long. So I think we've got a new head of people and are trying to really kind of map out that featured talent. I mean, I think that for businesses like ours, the thing that will only constrain our ability to grow is our ability to bring on and maintain really great people. So for us, it's not a throughput thing. We're not a manufacturer. We're not looking for, it's not a capital thing because we have plenty of capital. It's going to be a talent. Can we get the right people and the right processes and then the right technologies, but it always starts with the people. So yeah, I mean, I can blocking and tackling on that. None of that's really earth shattering, but it's all the tools. It's starting with referral bonuses for our field guys, making sure that they know that they should be the best source of potential talent, screening all the way up. And then at the top finding really great hated recruiters. I used to kind of be one a little bit at that company, Water Talent, if you remember, and kind of got to know sort of how that industry works until you find really, really good ones who totally get you and get what you're after and can really help you speed up. And they'll find people you think, there's no way we'll find somebody who can do this, this, and this in this place. And then they do. And then you say, wow, you just earned your fee, I guess. Because I think the in-person, that lack of connectivity with that cultural fit, really trying to understand what we're building from a people perspective and the kind of people we want is usually something lost in translation in a process like that. But I mean, I'm skipping over the fact that we've made many mistakes and, underhired, overhired, all the normal challenges. So I won't say we're that good at it, but they're trying to get better.
Well, the hiring is one thing, and then there's the managing. But obviously, the ideal version of this is the hiring people that don't need to be managed and just go and do all of the things that you need them to without being asked. What have you learned about management, and what was the impact of your military experience on that side of your job?
This is the fully indoctrinated Marine talking here, but just really probably the best training environment for leadership is in the Marine Corps, particularly the infantry in the Marine Corps. I think just all of those fundamentals that get drilled into your brain, from ductus exemplo, which is lead by example, to brilliance in the basics, to officers eat last in the officer training, sort of the last people to eat should be the officers. Your guys should eat first, which is sort of a servant leader mindset that we try to inculcate in our team, which is that the companies don't work for us. We work for them. We're there to service. And there's been a number of times where I've sniffed out, our team sort of being like, well, you kind of report to me and we just crush it. Any chance we see it, anytime we see it, you're working and you are all working for the field teams and our technicians, and they're working for our customers. So, just the weapons gear self is sort of after every patrol, you take care of your weapon first, then your equipment, then yourself, and sort of just trying to put the mission the front end. So it was a really great place to learn. And again, you give a 23-year-old 40 guys and however much equipment in the area size of Rhode Island to go govern, a lot of responsibility early on, and just truly probably, best career decision I ever made was to start there. But here's the but. I didn't have to worry about budget. I didn't really actually make hiring or firing decisions there. I got my team and I kind of had to make it work. I wasn't negotiating their salary with them. That was set by Congress. I didn't have to figure out where their healthcare was coming from, where their food was coming from. So while you kind of get to know the people, which is, I think, ends up being a challenge for a lot of veteran business owners and managers and entrepreneurs, is this sort of like, oh boy, that's a whole area I've never really had to deal with. And also on the other end, the sort of not just taking a make it work mindset, that sometimes that we would be given, teams and just sort of head down, just go, instead of saying, actually, is there a better way of doing this? I'll use the soapbox to fight against the automaton, just follow orders stereotype that a lot of, I think, people have about the military. I think we were, the Marine Corps ethos is about centralized planning, but then hyper decentralized execution. You set the restraints, constraints, the left and right lateral limits, the what you must do, what you can't do. And then you watch people go. Don't tell them how to do something, tell them what you want done and let them surprise you, is very much the mindset. So that's a great place to learn how to be a manager. But it's really, but then flipping to entrepreneur, which is now there's dollars and cents, there's fog of war, of market war. And how do I keep these people around where I don't have the back end of a massive bureaucracy? I think can be really challenging for a lot of veteran entrepreneurs. So that's the stuff that I had to learn the hard way.
So interesting. I don't think it's any surprise that the two founders that I know that are out of the Marine Corps, you and Mr. Matt Swindle of N-Line Energy, there are overlaps in terms of quality, Peter. No, it's so interesting.
That's my guy. Prior employer too, in the BIV family. Proud, best boss I ever had.
He's great, really just such a great guy. I want us to zoom out a little bit. I wanted to ask you about what you think of the prospects for water globally, but I don't think that's quite the fit. I'm really interested in what you see as, maybe it's just the domestic market, maybe even as close to the Southwest of what your immediate world of operations is. There's just been some distinct data points that have come out. I don't know, you probably read the ProPublica piece about the aridification of the global intratropical belt across the world, but obviously the degree of water stress that the US is going to be going through is sort of incontrovertible, as well as the infrastructure against which you superimpose that water stress is now aged out. You're sort of seeing these reference points like the $12.5 billion data center in Arizona gets canceled because the people in Arizona are just like, no. We know you interact with water resources. Don't care. You're not building it here. How do you see this kind of market developing? And you can use whatever aperture it is, whether it's regional, national, global. Like, how do you see it?
Yeah, we keep touch points on it all the time. This is the fun part of having been in the water industry conference circuit for years before I basically stopped going to them to run these businesses. But yeah, the ProPublica piece was fascinating. Not least of all, as a water well service, we have one of our kind of platform companies does that. But boy, was it validation that we don't drill. So I think the interesting takeaway for me is so much of the seawater is that a non-trivial amount of the seawater rise is actually driven by over-extraction of groundwater that then ultimately ends up in the ocean. So this isn't the ice caps melting. This is us putting more water in the ocean. I don't think anyone had ever seen that so clearly laid out. So, and I got the academic paper behind it that I'm trying to understand too. And Jay Famiglietti is a great communicator on water science facts, and he's one of the authors. Boy, was that an eye opener. I mean, it also made a validation for what we do, which is not increasing the extraction of, it's maintaining the existing infrastructure we have and trying to get that to operate a little more efficiently. So that's just a quick sidebar on that paper, which I highly recommend to everybody. But no, I think, and so the other thing you touched on was, so AI revolution, let's just talk about it. Dinner with one of the large privately held construction companies and described basically a pipeline of AI, particularly AI data center growth that overshadowed all of the liquefied natural gas capex ever expended in America. So just like step change demand for building of things, and actually opened my brain that, the average data center was basically kind of like a tilt up or a warehouse with mainframes, but the AI data centers are actually looking more like a petrochemical or gas refinery plant in terms of the energy demands, the seismic needs, some of the engineering, and that they really are a different thing. And so, of course, what do we think about when we see that? Isn't the energy and the need to build micro nukes next to it and all that? It's the water. It's that every chat GPT query is roughly a quart of water, depending on how many follow-up queries you have on it. And so for us, actually, our water treatment business, that's a big part of it, is how do we maintain and push the number of cycles of concentration? So try to make that a ton more water efficient without driving the system into stress, because these are oftentimes mission critical, assets. Friends in the data center growth, it's fascinating. Your point on the Arizona story, depending on the city, you'll have cities along the I-40 corridor where all the Ethernet goes that'll be saying, please build here desperately, when you double click and they don't have the water for it. There's no way they do. Other cities who are trying to use water as the cudgel to avoid the growth of a thing that they don't want into it next to their house, draining their aquifers. So it's just this really fascinating time where water ends up kind of rising to the level of, and again, you and I, how many times have we vented about it's not on the P&L because water's too cheap. Classic Adam Smith diamond water paradox. Water is absolutely essential in use, but very underpriced in exchange. This is why diamonds, you don't need them, but they're really expensive. Well, that's because the concept of marginal utility came into fruition. And then it's off balance sheet, even though, again, from your CDP, carbon, sort of, even though like if you don't have water in Pakistan, you don't have cotton and you don't have Levi's jeans, sort of like the off balance sheet risk of all this stuff. I think is now, I hope, finally starting to become appreciated at the kind of the board level of the Fortune 500, and also in decision makers, not just in the West. Yeah, I mean, just as one note, we started out here, but we now have companies in Florida, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Connecticut, Chicagoland. So we're seeing sort of now nationwide. We're still just in the US, but just how different from region to region, watershed to watershed, people are thinking about water. I guess one interesting last tidbit on the AI is I think there's a little bit more of a growing consensus that you build the AI where water and energy are plentiful, and then you run Ethernet. Don't run transmission lines. Those are hard. Run cable. And that Ethernet might lead to a little bit of a lag from so maybe not for day trading or the quick trading requirements. That won't work. But for like your average social media site or something like that, a little bit of lag is probably okay to be able to build where there's abundant water and power. So I'd say that's probably, and then instead of running big old power lines with, rights of way and easements that'll take decades, maybe just run the cable along the highway. So I think that's been the most interesting kind of breakthrough on that front that I've heard that might allow us to place the stuff again where water is more abundant.
Super interesting. And in terms of broad-based tailwinds, one of the most, I showed this at our AGM, there was a lot of fanfare about the renationalization of industry and the crossover between administrations, but the line went vertical in whatever it was, late 2021, essentially, in terms of just the amount of commercial and industrial building work that was going on. And now that has again been supercharged over time since the beginning of this year. But the line had jumped 3.5 times from kind of the baseline that you saw in the run up to 2020. And what I saw was not a whole bunch, well, it's definitely a bunch of stuff being built, of course, but what you're seeing is a rebaselining of water use within the domestic US. What has been the interaction of that explosion of building work with your business? I'm just curious as to how this has manifested within your overall portfolio and what that looks like, whether it's conversations or contracts or what that looks like or how it shows up in your world.
Yeah, it shows up a few ways. So most of what we're doing is highly recurring mission critical service work on existing facilities, be it utilities, commercial or industrial. We have a mind towards the new build and tracking progress of new construction, new utility extension. But we are a little bit, let's say, rather than the early bird getting the worm, we're the second mouse getting the cheese. So actually we find trying to track the new build stuff, there's massive delays. There's existing entrenched relationships between contractors and service providers. And so oftentimes we'll keep track of the new stuff that's going on while we're maintaining the stuff we do, and then have enough belief in our team that we can kind of come in after the fact and probably supplant whatever they're doing because we could probably do it better. So I think that's, again, this is where it's like we actually, are not chasing where the federal dollars are going or where the big spend is going. We're a little bit again, in a gold mine sell shovels sort of mindset is sort of look for the base load, mission critical, last dollar cut. Not all the businesses we had grew through COVID and through '08 because there's sort of these baseline needs that are required, which means they never really hockey stick too, right? So we're not chasing the fast growth. So I guess that's a short way of saying the short way of saying that is that we're monitoring all the macro tailwinds and the building that's happening, but I think are going to, rather than chasing, is also this part of our theory about elephant hunting and logo hunting. You'll hear about people trying to get the logo of the Fortune 500s all over their website. And our experience is that they're not always great customers. Love them. And if they're out there, we'll take the business. But you're oftentimes previous small businesses like us being driven through a really robust purchasing team that drives you on terms and makes your life not so much fun as instead what we have with a lot of the middle market customers we have, which is really more of like a trusted advisor. We're actually we think about their system more than they do and oftentimes have more information about their system than they do and are brought in not as an arm's length service provider, but more like a part of the team. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying we keep tabs on it, but aren't like changing our strategy based on that.
So I say this with the correct degree of trepidation, given that we're in very, very different businesses. But how do you think about the use of technology within what you're doing? And just give us an idea of how, if there is something out there that can, help you do your job better on behalf of the customer, what is this threshold of proof points that you needed? Like, how do you think about the incorporation of it?
We think about it all the time. And so while we are not, let's say, pushing the boundaries ourselves, we don't think necessarily like AI will take our job. I think what we do, our business models that are around 100 years ago will probably be around 100 years from now. But someone who uses AI might beat us. So we think of it as a business accelerator and as a way to improve our processes, improve their ability to execute and to do more with less. That's on just sort of call it the IT stack of which we're constantly trying to improve and just get our data right and use that to empower the brains and the kind of mission critical skilled trade folks we have. But within water, we think about it all the time. We're trying to test out what is the future of a digital pump monitoring. 75% of the life cycle cost of a pump is the energy consumed. 7% of California's energy is used mostly just from pushing water around, fourth largest economy in the world. And so for us, it's a real needle mover and it helps us to candidly get work if we can show them that by putting a pump that we install and design and engineer that's specific to their need, not just copy and paste, can help lower that. And so, but then monitoring that and feeding that to them in a proactive digital way is something that no one in our industry has really done. And we're kind of testing out now. On the water treatment side, we acquired the North American rights to a really wonderful technology called Dioxide Pacific, which is a single chem on-site chemistry generator that can help kind of change the entire supply chain and help us lower the carbon footprint and chemical intensity of the water treatment we do. So we've got a few bets on that, on call it earlier stage nascent things that we think of, but sort of, we're again a little bit burned from earlier and realizing we aren't the entrepreneurs like your team and aren't going to be take the thing out of the lab and get it into scale. God bless the people who can. So I guess the way we think about it too is the other side is, and this is something we should talk more about, and any of your portfolio companies listening, is we have thousands of really wonderful customers who often look to us for ideas. A lot of times are willing to even have a side stream or a pilot site or test out things because they're oftentimes trying to push the envelope themselves. So we got to be careful and make sure it's the right fit and it abides by our standards and all. But I think that's the way we are thinking about how to both flow technology through our existing businesses. And then I think we're maybe 2 or 3 years out from a real kind of R&D, internal skunk work development. We've started a real strategic planning process in the last year that comes from builds a bottom up sort of market mapping where we look at adjacencies and areas for growth and are trying to start what are the things we need to do now to be ready 5-10 years from now. And it's not just being ready, but maybe even shaping what the world looks like and create the new best available technology that's economically feasible. So we need help. So help us out. I think right now we're trying to get the engine and humming and take care of the people we have. But I think a lot of them are really excited about us maybe bringing those new ideas too, that they wouldn't have had exposure to in being just the regional businesses they were.
So interesting because, especially it's another example of the luxury that comes from having this very long timeline ahead of you. Bezos had this thing that all of the next 12 quarters are baked. I'm working on the stuff that's, 3 years out. And you just said that you're trying to work on the stuff that's 5 to 10. So you're in excess of Jeff.
Well, I wish. Oh my gosh. No, 99% of my time is on the like stuff I should have done yesterday. So don't take that wrong. It's actually really more just we're a little bit of a forcing function from really great advisors of ours who said, if you don't start now, it'll never happen. And then by then it's too late. So you have to really think about, what you need to do today to make something like that possible. Not to detract from the train running, but it's also a fun thing for us to kind of allow ourselves to do on occasion.
Who have you learned most from? They don't have to still be alive, but as you've gone through this process, who's been the sort of single biggest influence?
I'll punt the single biggest and just rattle off a few great folks that have helped us along the way. Ross Brendel and Rich Littlehale at Westerly Group, our anchor investor, board members, have been so great in helping us, again, push for quality, avoid the blind spots. Again, this is you'll want, even if you're going it alone, your entrepreneurs on the phone here, you're going to look for somebody to help you stay honest and stay on the path, because it's a wonderful thing when you have it, who truly have your back and are looking for your best interests. We have another great investor, Will Thorndike, who's a author of a book called Outsiders, a tremendous, both thinker and builder of great businesses that we've learned a lot from in terms of some of our discipline. And then, we've got some new investors from larger scale businesses. I think this is where we're kind of crossing the $100 million mark. And that is a whole different set of requirements, needs, challenges than from the 0 to 5, which is our first business, 5 billion revenue, just a really beautiful, wonderful small business. That's how we started. And so then we're realizing we kind of maybe need to expand our aperture of people that we talk to who've taken on that kind of 100 to 500 million revenue challenge in the past and done it without losing their soul and without creating a bureaucracy that you would run from. So we're kind of omnivores looking for all the good ideas everywhere we can.
I want to ask you about another influence, because I think you were in a really interesting partnership. Your wife, Lily, is an extraordinary artist and has built her own business. So she's an entrepreneur and an artist. And I really just wanted to ask you, what have you learned from her?
It's so fun. So she's, the truly best thing I've got going for me. And
she is cool.
What's been really fun is likewise to your better half, who I went on a school trip with, lest we forget.
Absolutely.
So, all the normal stuff, which is really like everybody says, the most important decision you'll ever make is going to be who your life partner is, truly. And so we've been married, 18 years and 3 kids. But what's been fun is to see someone who, wouldn't be doing what she's doing, even if it weren't a real business, which is painting. She's an abstract painter, oil on canvas. And there's something about seeing somebody who's the intrinsic thing she does is also the thing that is her occupation. Not that I don't love Excel and meetings and Zoom calls, but it's not the same as sort of like, would you do this in your free time also? And for her, it's that. So, but it's been really fun to watch her from what was always a passion, more than a hobby, but sometimes wasn't always the thing that was helping us keep the lights on. And then the last few years, is now in a bunch of museum collections and a bunch of great collections that shows kind of all over the world, Paris, London, Athens, and the like. So I get to kind of carry her bags on those trips, which is fun. What's really fun is when we hang out with artists, I'm of course like, this is amazing. The sort of whatever side of the brain that is, from scratch, coming up with things. A lot of times I don't even really know why. And it's more, but these are some of the, best artists of our generation, I guess. And all they want to talk about, Tom, is water, especially ours living in LA. Literally, I can't get them to talk about their art because they say, stop. I just make pretty little pictures. I want to hear about, do we have enough water? Are we going to be okay? Is there enough to go around? Is my water clean? Do I have microplastics in my brain? This is why I really like where we are. It's one wire, we get to compliment each other in those ways. She has a collector who's sort of a pretty major celebrity who had a birthday party. And I know I'm the only person on planet Earth who's gone from the Compton Water Department, one of our great customers, to like a Hollywood birthday party ever too. So there's sort of a fun thing about being in that, foot in two worlds. But I think there's this amazing thing that's happening, which is people are really waking up to the role of water, to its scarcity, to the fact that we've abused it. We've treated it as, our dumping grounds for too long, and are worried about what their kids are getting. They're worried about the sustainability of areas. And I think they started to wake up to the quote that I think I heard from you first, attributed to whomever, which is that, if climate change is the shark, then water is its teeth. Whatever it is, 70, 80 odd % of the pain of climate change will be manifested in some water related phenomena, drought, sea level rise, aquifers, solidification, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, as much as I want to hang out and talk art with a lot of them, which I find is a thing that's sort of for nothing in and of it, it's sort of like in and of itself, sort of like the culmination of sort of just human baseline creativity for no other purpose and except to that is really a beautiful thing to see happen. But all they want to talk about is water. So that's the fun part.
That is so interesting. I love it. I love the idea that you're being stymied. Even if you want to get out, you get pulled back in from the most unlikely. And also, I totally agree with you. Right brain, left brain. I can never remember which one's which. There's some irony in there somewhere. I'm not quite sure where it is.
Which makes us which one? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. One of them. Yeah, sure. Peter, this was really fantastic. I really want to congratulate you on what you've built. What I brought up earlier about being off there on the desert island while the rest of us schmoes are kind of running around with our sort of like incentive structures. The reason I was so keen on doing this and the reason I wanted this to be longer is that the actual execution against a model of patient capital and the building of a compounding machine, like as you alluded to it earlier, this is how businesses used to be built. And it's incredibly powerful. And you and Michael have really done a phenomenal job. And at the end of it is just this huge machine for the solving of water problems. I hope you take some time. I know how busy you are, but I hope every once in a while you do kind of sit down and reflect on what you've built. And what you've built is a very large agent for positive change in how we deal with our increasingly under fire water resources. I wanted to make sure I said that on the record, Peter.
Thanks, man. This is where the mutual respect of what your team and investments are doing is the actual hard part, which is that 0 to 1. And Michael and I, if we've had any success, it's honestly just listening to the people around us and trying to do right by what they expect of us. So, but thanks, man. And
it's such a privilege.
Inspired by you every day too.
No, it's really great. We have come to our final question, which we ask all of our guests on the Fundamental Molecule. That if you had to choose one piece of advice for current and future water entrepreneurs, what would that piece of advice be?
I would say spending some time on the true north. What are your, if you could call it the deathbed test, call it the obituary test, but sort of at your end of days, kind of what's the thing you would have liked to have done? Knowing that dollars, you can't take any of that with you. And I think for at least me, it's a little bit just sort of, did you do good? Did you help others? Did you try to make the world incrementally better? Did you help to alleviate some amount of human suffering and push the chance for human dignity? But whatever that thing is for you, I'd say take a little time to ruminate on that and see if you can build a career that helps support it.
Doesn't get more fundamental than that, which is a great way of ending an episode of the Fundamental Molecule. Look at this. Everything's all very fundamental. Very wise words, Peter. Characteristic. Thank you so much for coming on. It's always such a pleasure to see you, and we'll speak to you soon, okay?
Thank you.
Cheers, sir. All the best.